It all started with a simple plan that was supposed to make life easier. 4 people, Brianna Clark, her young daughter, and 2 longtime friends, Montana Hull and his roommate Perez, decided to share a house together. The arrangement seemed perfect at first. Split the costs, share the space, and build a small community under one roof. But as often happens when friends become roommates, what began as an act of trust turned into a spiral of tension, unpaid rent, and broken promises. And when all was said and done, it was Judge Judy Shindlin who would decide who was telling the truth and who was simply trying to talk their way out of responsibility. Brianna Clark had known both Montana and Perez for quite a while. They got along well enough, and since she was raising her little girl on her own, she thought moving in together would give her both financial relief and extra help with childcare. In March of 2014, they signed a lease on a new place, a decent home where her daughter could have her own room. Everyone's name was on the lease, and on paper, it all looked fair and equal. But as Judge Judy would soon remind them, fairness doesn't live on paper. It lives in actions. When the move took place in early March, Brianna was the only one with a steady income. She worked several days a week while her roommates, Montana and Perez, were both unemployed. Montana explained that he was in the middle of starting a business, building clients, and trying to create a new path for himself. Brianna, understanding his situation, agreed to cover the first month's rent and the deposit, a total of $2,350, with the understanding that everyone would pay their share later. But as Judge Judy would later note, promises don't pay landlords. Once they moved in, Brianna juggled work, parenting, and the financial burden of the household. Her parents helped watch her daughter about 60% of the time, but the rest of the time, the little girl stayed home with Montana and Perez. That became a point of tension later, because what started as casual help began to be interpreted by Montana as part of the rent deal. He believed that since he and Perez were looking after Brianna's daughter while she worked, that time and care counted toward their share of expenses. But Brianna insisted no such agreement was ever made. "I never said watching my daughter replaced rent," she told the judge. "They were supposed to pay their part, period." Tension simmered quietly in the house. Brianna's boyfriend began visiting often, and that made the living situation even more uncomfortable. Montana, feeling like he was playing a parental role to Brianna's daughter while the boyfriend lounged around, began to resent the whole setup. As he later told Judge Judy, "It didn't feel right. I was taking care of the child while some guy who wasn't even her father was hanging around all day." Brianna, of course, didn't see it that way. To her, it was just a temporary inconvenience. But Judge Judy didn't miss a beat when she summed it up in court. That's not a healthy arrangement. Someone had to go. By May, things completely unraveled. There had been whispers of resentment, unpaid bills, and late payments. But what truly broke the camel's back was something almost absurd: a missing piggy bank and less than $10 in change. One evening, Brianna noticed that some of her coins were gone. Small change she kept aside, maybe for laundry or her daughter's candy. She texted Montana, accusing him of taking it. That small accusation exploded into a storm of anger. "Why would I take $10 in change?" Montana said, fuming. "I spend hundreds on that kid. I don't need your spare quarters." That argument tore the fragile household apart. In the days that followed, conversations turned into shouting matches. Montana claimed that Brianna told him he could move out early and skip May's rent if he left immediately. Brianna insisted that wasn't true, that he still owed for every day he'd lived there. On May 21st, Montana and Perez packed their things and left the house behind. Leaving behind more than just tension, they left unpaid rent, unpaid promises, and a bitter taste of betrayal. When they all found themselves in front of Judge Judy, the truth, or several versions of it, came out in sharp detail. Brianna calmly explained that she had paid everything up front: the deposit, the first month, and most of the ongoing rent. The 2 men, meanwhile, hadn't paid their fair share. Montana claimed that he gave her $200 before moving out, which Brianna confirmed. But that was only a small fraction of what he owed. That still leaves $975 unpaid from the beginning, Judge Judy said, tapping her pen on the bench. And if you didn't pay May's rent, that's another $475. Montana tried to justify it. I didn't think I owed that because she said if we moved out, we wouldn't have to pay for May. Judge Judy raised an eyebrow, her voice steady but piercing. You lived there in May, didn't you? She asked. Yes, he admitted. Then you owe rent for May. You don't get to live somewhere for free just because you decided to move out halfway through the month. The courtroom was silent except for the sound of her ruling bit by bit. Judge Judy laid out the math as only she could, firm, sharp, and final. You owed her $175 for your half of the deposit and first month's rent. You paid her $200, so you still owe $975. Add $475 for May, and that brings us to $1,140. Montana and Perez exchanged glances, realizing there was nowhere left to hide. Anything else you want to tell me? Judy asked. Brianna simply shook her head. There was never an agreement for childcare as rent, she said quietly. Judge Judy turned toward the camera, her decision made. Judgment for the plaintiff in the amount of $140. The gavel came down, sharp and certain. The case was closed. As the parties stepped out of the courtroom, Bird's voice echoed through the hallway. Parties are excused. You may step out. Brianna walked away with quiet relief, not because of the money, but because the chaos that had filled her home for months had finally been given a clear ending. Montana and Perez, on the other hand, walked out with the realization that in the eyes of the law, and in the eyes of Judge Judy, excuses and explanations don't erase rent debt. It was a lesson about promises, boundaries, and the price of blurred lines between friendship and responsibility. What had started as a hopeful plan to share a home ended up as a courtroom reckoning. Montana's dream of starting his business was real enough, but it couldn't pay the bills. Brianna's kindness in helping her friends had backfired, leaving her financially exposed and emotionally exhausted. In the end, the $10 of missing change had only been a spark. The real fire had been burning for months. Judge Judy's courtroom had seen countless cases of roommates falling out, but this one carried all the usual ingredients: trust misplaced, money misunderstood, and pride that wouldn't bend. She knew, perhaps better than anyone, that shared living arrangements often end the same way they begin, with good intentions and bad math. As the camera faded out, the story of Brianna Clark, Montana Hull, and the little house they shared became another cautionary tale in Judge Judy's long line of human dramas. It wasn't about villains or victims. It was about choices, and how quickly friendship can crumble when rent, responsibility, and respect fall out of balance. In the end, Judge Judy's words lingered in the air like a verdict larger than the dollar amount itself. Life's not about what you think is fair. It's about what you agreed to. And if you don't live up to your word, someone else ends up paying for it. And with that, the gavel of justice fell, echoing through another ordinary story turned extraordinary in the hands of America's toughest judge.